The morning began like any other. Light slid through the blinds and painted pale lines across the table. Before I begin this story, make sure you subscribe to Revenge with Davis and press the bell icon, so you never miss these powerful stories of betrayal and justice. The smell of old coffee lingered in the kitchen. I picked up the newspaper, turned to the business section, and thought of calling my son later in the day. That thought never reached the afternoon. The phone rang. I answered with no fear. A voice came, calm, professional, heavy, Dr. Richardson from Northwestern Memorial. He said my son was gone. He gave the time. He gave the words that cut the floor from under me. Peaceful passing, minimal pain. Final hour at 1:15. The receiver slipped in my hand. The paper fell to the ground. Pages scattered like broken leaves. My breath caught in my chest. I asked him again. He repeated, "There was no mistake. My son Ronald was dead." I stood in the hallway where family photographs lined the wall. His face at 5 with a toy airplane. His face at 10 holding a science fair medal. His face at 20 in his first suit. His face on his wedding day standing beside the woman who was now his widow. Every frame cut into me. I called her my daughter-in-law. She answered in a salon. I could hear laughter and dryers. I told her Ronald was gone. She did not pause. She did not cry. She said one line clear and sharp. "You will get nothing from his 70 million. Then she ended the call. I sat alone at the table. The room held silence like a coffin. The words rang inside me. Not grief, not comfort, just money. She had known before me. She had planned before me. And her first words to me were a warning that I would receive nothing. The funeral came. Black cars, long faces, words of comfort that floated but did not land. The minister spoke of eternal rest. The choir sang of peace. My son lay still. His widow sat dressed in black silk. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, eyes dry as stone. People whispered about her strength. I knew better. After the funeral, we drove to a glass tower in the city. The reading of the will. A long table, leather chairs, a silver-haired lawyer with polished voice. He opened a folder. He spoke in clean sentences that felt like knives. All assets to the widow. All property to the widow. All shares to the widow. No claim for the father. I sat still. My hands gripped the chair. My heart sank into silence. She smiled faintly. She looked at me with victory. She had erased me from my son's life with a page of legal words. The door opened with force. A man ran in, breathless, face red, shirt damp. My son's old friend, Jimmy. He held a thick envelope. His voice thundered. "Do not believe them. Do not sign. It is all a lie." The widow turned pale. The lawyer stammered. The room shifted. Jimmy laid down photographs, receipts, phone records. He spoke of betrayal. He spoke of a false will. He spoke of an affair with the lawyer. He said Ronald knew. He said Ronald planned. Jimmy placed his hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm. He looked into my eyes. He said your son knew the truth. He said your son left proof. He said your son loved you. I tried to answer. My throat locked. I only nodded. My mouth was dry. My throat felt like gravel. Pain and relief twisted together inside me. For the first time since the call, I could breathe again. The widow stared at the floor. The lawyer sat frozen. The envelope lay between us like a silent judge. And I knew. This was not the end. This was the beginning. Night gave me no sleep. The clock ticked and each sound felt like a nail. I sat in the dark house that no longer felt like mine. My son was gone. His widow had the fortune. The lawyer had the papers. The truth waited in an envelope held by a friend. Morning came slow. The sky outside turned pale gray. I stood at the window with cold coffee in my hands. Children rode bicycles. Neighbors watered their lawns. The world did not care about the hole in my chest. A car arrived, black and polished. She stepped out. My daughter-in-law. Beside her walked two men in suits. They carried folders and wore faces without expression. She stood on the porch like a queen. She told me it was over. She said the documents were ready. She said the estate was hers and I should leave at once. Her voice was polite but sharp. Her eyes told me I was already erased. I asked her why. I asked how she could do this. She smiled without warmth. She said this is life. She said money waits for no one. She said love is a story for fools. She turned her back before I could speak again. The men placed papers in my hand. Legal lines filled the page. My son's name stood at the top, but nothing of him remained in the words. Each line pulled me further from my own blood. By noon I stood at the door with a small bag. Inside was a pair of clothes and a photograph of Ronald when he was 10. His smile was bright. His eyes were alive. I carried that picture like breath itself. She watched from the doorway with arms folded. The men stood behind her. Their silence was harder than any insult. I walked down the path. Each step pressed into gravel that once felt like home. Now it was exile. The door closed behind me. The sound echoed like judgment. I walked to the park 2 blocks away. I sat on a wooden bench. Children laughed on swings. A dog barked at pigeons. Parents called their children home for supper. The world moved on. I sat still with a bag at my feet and grief at my back. Night fell. The lamps flickered to life. My breath showed in the air. I had no roof. I had no bed. I had no son. Only a memory and the faint promise of justice. Days blurred into each other. I wandered the streets. I slept on benches. I ate what I could afford. In shelters, men lay shoulder to shoulder. No one asked names. No one cared. I was one more shadow among shadows, but something began to grow inside me, a small spark. Jimmy's words echoed each night. Your son knew. Your son planned. Your son loved you. I held those words like fire in the cold. One evening I passed the house. Music filled the garden. Cars filled the drive. Laughter poured from windows. She lived like a queen, rings on her fingers, wine in her hand. Guests who never knew Ronald's heart filled the rooms he once walked. The roses my wife had planted were now trampled by strangers. I turned away before rage drowned me. In the park I met an old man. His coat was worn and his hair was white. He sat beside me without asking. He spoke of nothing at first. Then he said he had once been rich. He said betrayal had cut deeper than poverty. He said justice is slow, but it always moves. He rose and left without another word. I carried his words like another stone of truth. I began to watch. I wrote notes in a small book. Each visit from the lawyer, each guest that came after dark, each envelope carried inside, I traced the map of her new life. She had the house and the fortune, but not peace. Her smile cracked when she thought no one watched. Fear lived in her eyes. One night I saw a new car arrive. A man stepped out. He was not a lawyer. He was not family. He moved quickly. She met him at the door. She clutched his arm too tightly. They spoke in whispers. She pulled him inside. I sat in the dark corner of the park. My chest burned, but my eyes did not close. Betrayal leaves tracks, and I had begun to follow them. I was cast out. But exile was not the end. It was the beginning of the hunt. The days stretched thin like old cloth. I walked the streets with my bag and my notebook, each page filled with notes about the house that was once mine. I saw her world grow fatter with each passing week. She had won the papers. She had won the fortune. She had taken the throne. The garden glowed at night with lights strung from tree to tree. Cars lined the street. Laughter spilled from the windows. Strangers walked the halls where my son had once built his dreams. I stood across the road in the dark and watched. Music shook the glass. Wine poured like water. She wore black silk and gold rings. She laughed louder than all the others. Her face was painted with victory, but her eyes darted like prey that senses a hunter. She held the throne, but she could not hold peace. I walked to the park each night. My bench became my home. I kept my bag under my feet and my notebook in my hand. I wrote down each license plate that came to the house. I marked each night the lawyer visited. I noted the hours when the lights stayed on till dawn. My notes grew thick. The map of betrayal became clear. One afternoon I followed her car. It moved through the city to a tall hotel. She stepped out dressed in dark glasses, though the sun had already set. A man waited by the door, tall silver hair, an expensive suit. He held her hand too long. They walked inside together. My stomach tightened, but my eyes stayed steady. I wrote the time. I wrote the place. Betrayal does not stay hidden when watched with patience. The throne she claimed was built on lies. Each lie added weight. Weight crushes even the strongest mask. I thought of Ronald. I thought of the nights in the hospital when he smiled at me, even as the pain burned him hollow. I thought of the way he whispered that he was still fighting. I thought of the way his hand gripped mine when he said he trusted me. His trust was the weapon I carried now. His widow thought I was broken. She thought I was finished. But a father does not leave his son's memory in the dirt. The house stood tall, but the walls shook with shadows. I saw deliveries at odd hours, boxes carried in with no record. I saw men leave with envelopes thick as bricks. I saw fear in the way she closed the curtains too quickly. She wore jewels, but her hands trembled when she thought no one looked. I walked the city by day and returned to the park by night. The shelter men called me silent. They did not know my silence was filled with fire. I was no beggar. I was a witness. I was waiting for the fall of the false throne. One evening, Jimmy sat beside me. He carried no envelope this time. He carried a flask of coffee. He said he was still digging. He said the truth was deeper than we thought. He said Ronald had hidden more than one letter. I listened in silence. I did not need to speak. My son had not left me alone. The throne in the house glowed bright with stolen gold. But in the park in the dark, on a wooden bench, a fire was building. A fire that would burn lies to ash. Rain fell across the city that night. Streets gleamed with water. Lamps burned halos in the mist. I sat on the bench under the park trees and watched the house. The windows glowed warm against the storm. Inside, she laughed with guests. Outside, I wrote in my notebook with wet hands. The lawyer came again. His car stopped by the gate. He carried another folder under his arm. She met him at the door. They spoke quick and low, their heads bent close like thieves dividing spoils. He handed her papers. She signed without reading. He left with eyes that shifted from side to side. Later, a banker's envelope arrived by mistake. The rain had smeared the address. The courier left it at the bench where I sat before realizing the error. I picked it up. Her name was scrawled, but so was mine faint in the corner as alternate contact. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a receipt, a transfer to a false company, a trail marked in numbers. The name of her lawyer appeared in the corner. My chest filled with heat. The shadows finally gave me proof. I copied every number. I folded the receipt into my book. It was the first stone in the wall of justice. The next nights I followed her car again. To hotels, to offices after dark. Each time the silver-haired lawyer waited. Each time they held hands too long. Each time her face carried fear mixed with hunger. Betrayal leaves prints. I gathered them one by one. I sat at the library by day. Old light bulbs buzzed overhead. I asked for public records. I traced company names. I traced bank transfers. I traced hidden lines that all led back to her and to him. The paper stacks grew high. My bag filled with evidence. I was no longer cast out. I was closing in. Jimmy came one evening with tired eyes. He had not slept. He carried another envelope. He said Ronald had left him copies of letters. Ronald had known about her affair. He had known about the forged papers. He had written of it with steady hand even in pain. His words said one thing clear. Protect my father. Protect the truth. I read those words under the weak park lamp. Rain dripped from the trees. My hands trembled. My son had seen everything. He had not died blind. He had not left me forgotten. He had prepared the ground for justice. The house across the street shone like a palace. Cars lined the drive. Music pulsed. She walked the garden in silk with her crown of stolen wealth. But inside her walls the shadows had begun to move. I closed my notebook. I felt the weight of proof heavy and real. The evidence was no longer in whispers. It was in numbers. In signatures. In letters from my son. The widow thought her throne was unshakable. She had no idea the floor was cracking beneath her feet. That night I slept without fear. Rain washed the streets clean. And in the dark silence I whispered one vow. Justice is coming. Morning broke clear after nights of storm. The city streets gleamed under pale sunlight. I walked with my bag and my notebook. Inside it lay the receipts, the forged transfers, the letters my son had written. The truth was ready. My feet carried me not to the park this time, but to the glass tower where the lawyer kept his office. Jimmy was waiting in the lobby. His eyes were tired but steady. He held the envelope tight to his chest. He nodded once. No words were needed. Together we stepped into the elevator. The numbers climbed. My chest beat with each floor. The doors opened to the conference room. She was already there, dressed in black silk once again, rings flashing on her fingers, her smile polished for the audience she expected. Beside her sat the lawyer. Silver hair, perfect tie, papers stacked in neat order before him. He began to speak, but the door opened again. A woman entered with a leather case. Dr. Chen, a document expert Jimmy had called. Her presence silenced the room. She asked for the will. The lawyer hesitated. Sweat already marked his brow. At last he pushed the blue folder across the table. She studied the pages under light and lens. She compared ink to paper. She measured strokes of the signature. She spoke calm words that cracked the silence like thunder. The will was false. The signature was forged. The date impossible. The widow's face drained of color. The lawyer shifted in his seat like a trapped animal. Jimmy placed the real will on the table. He said Ronald had written it in his last weeks. He said Ronald had trusted him to keep it safe. He said Ronald had left everything to his father. I sat still. My hands rested flat on the table. My son's words came alive in the expert's mouth. To my beloved father who never left my side, I leave my entire estate. The widow cried out. Her voice cracked. She begged. She said it was a mistake. She said she was afraid. She said she only wanted security. Her hands reached toward me, but I did not move. I looked at her with the weight of all her lies pressing back on her. The lawyer tried to stand. Jimmy blocked him. Footsteps in the hall told us the police had arrived. Doors opened. Officers stepped in. Their eyes fell on the forged will, on the trembling widow, on the lawyer who could not meet their gaze. The room filled with voices of law. Papers were sealed. Evidence taken, the widow shouted. The lawyer pleaded. None of it mattered now. The truth had stepped out of the shadows and stood in the light. I left the building with the letter my son had written, folded in my pocket. His words burned against my heart. I am proud to be your son. I will always do right by you. Weeks passed. The court spoke. The widow was stripped of her wealth. The lawyer was stripped of his name. Both faced the punishment they had earned. The house was mine again. The company shares were mine. The 70 million was mine. But more than wealth, I had my son's honor. He had not been fooled. He had not left me forgotten. He had trusted me even in death to guard his legacy. I walked through the door of the house once more. The rooms were silent, but they were mine. The chair waited by the fire. The photograph of my wife still stood on the shelf. I sat and felt the weight of both loss and justice. My son was gone, but his truth lived. His love lived. And justice had returned me to the home I built with my own hands. The throne she tried to steal was dust now. The true crown was memory and love. And I swore that night under my own roof that betrayal would never again rule in this house. Thank you for watching this story. If you want more powerful stories of betrayal and justice, don't forget to subscribe to Revenge with Davis. Your support keeps these stories alive.